My name is Noel Marlowe, and nothing in my life prepared me for the moment I saw my son humiliated on that stage. The spring sunlight had slipped through the high windows of North Grove Middle School's auditorium, illuminating rows of folding chairs packed shoulder to shoulder with families, teachers, and students clutching programs and popcorn. I stood at the back, deliberately blending into the shadowed alcove so I could witness Jalen's debut without distraction. He was 12, lanky with a mop of curls and a nervous energy that made him shift his feet even before the spotlight hit him. He carried his guitar like a shield, his fingers trembling slightly on the fretboard as he stepped into the warm glow. My chest swelled with pride at the sight of him, my boy, finally brave enough to honor the grandfather he adored by playing Simple Man, the song Harold had taught me years ago. I could almost hear Harold's voice guiding Jalen's chords. Two hesitant strums rang out, crisp and hopeful, and then the unthinkable happened. Jalen's voice caught. His confidence evaporated like mist. His hands froze on the strings, and silence slammed into the hall. I felt my pulse quicken as I moved a step closer, chest tightening with the pain of seeing my son falter. Then came the jarring laughter, a harsh ricochet through the quiet. Like father, like son, both are useless. Bradley's voice was loud and venomous, cutting across the auditorium from the front row where he sat with his arms crossed, smug grin in place. I surged forward, my heart hammering, but before I could reach him the scene escalated. Bradley rose, storming toward the stage with the recklessness of someone who believed bloodlines gave him license to harm. He grabbed Jalen's arm with iron strength and, in one swift motion, slapped him hard enough that the guitar twisted in Jalen's lap and his cheek reddened instantly. A collective gasp rattled through the audience, followed by a teacher's scream. My knees went weak. Shame and rage collided inside me, threatening to erupt. From the wings, Harold's smug smirk gleamed under the lights, and his voice carried clear. Well, he needed to learn some shame. Shame. The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, as though it were an edict rather than an insult. What none of them realized was that Jalen's jacket microphone was live, and the humiliating slap, Bradley's cruel laughter, Harold's cold remark all streamed through the speakers to every corner of that crowded auditorium and beyond. Instantly, I knew that the moment would be seared into every mind present and every household listening on the district broadcast. Adrenaline blurred my vision as I rushed up the side stairs to the stage, weaving past stunned students and frozen staff. I reached Jalen first. He stood rigid, eyes wide, guitar dangling forgotten in his hands. His face was flushed, tears brimming as he stared at Bradley, the man who'd struck him. Without thinking, I pulled Jalen into my arms, tucking him close and feeling the tremor of his body against mine. "It's okay, son," I whispered, though my own voice cracked. "It's okay." He buried his face in my suit jacket, and I felt the wet warmth of his tears. Bradley hovered, chest heaving, his face a mask of fury and indignation that erupted into a shout. "You can't just swoop in." But I didn't wait to hear more. With a determined bark, I turned and led Jalen down the steps, my other arm shielding him from the jeers already rising from the crowd. My eyes met Harold's across the stage, smirk nowhere to be found, replaced by surprise. And in that instant, I understood something fundamental. The silence I'd maintained for the sake of family harmony had protected monsters. Bradley, emboldened by status, had believed he could strike my son without consequence. Harold, perched in silent approval, had surrendered his moral compass for pride. But the live mic meant the district heard everything. Every ounce of cruelty was recorded. As Jalen and I reached the backstage curtain, I knelt, drawing him into my arms. His small body shook with sobs, his guitar abandoned on a case strewn with cables. I brushed damp curls from his forehead and spoke words I knew he needed. "You were extraordinary up there. You had the courage to try. They will remember your bravery far more than their cruelty." He looked up, tear-streaked, and whispered, "Why would Uncle Bradley do that?" My chest tightened again, anger coiling like a spring. "Because he's afraid to be seen," I said softly. "But we won't let shame be his weapon anymore." I hugged him until his breathing slowed. Behind us, the auditorium remained a cacophony of outrage and whispers. I stood, scooping up Jalen's guitar and keys. "Let's go home," I said, voice firm. "We have work to do." As we walked out into the cool afternoon air, I knew this was only the beginning. They had humiliated my son, but they had also ignited something powerful in me. Protecting Jalen was no longer enough. It was time to wield the power I'd quietly amassed through Plan Indigo and make sure that justice, and dignity would finally have their stage. I carried Jalen across the threshold of our home with his guitar case dragging behind us, every footstep echoing like a drumbeat of rage in my skull, and when I laid him gently on the couch his body trembled with silent sobs that shook my own chest. For in that moment, I understood the depth of his pain better than any words could convey. Isla hovered in the doorway, arms folded, face pale and tight, with the same reluctance I had seen so many times before when family discord threatened to erupt, and she said in a hushed tone, "It's family business. Don't blow this out of proportion," as though shielding Bradley and Harold from accountability were more important than protecting our son. But I recognized beneath her words the dread of scandal, the fear that our carefully constructed image would crumble if the truth came to light. And I found that I could no longer bear her silence, because quiet had never been my weakness but her weapon, a velvet glove concealing an iron fist of complacency that allowed cruelty to fester unchecked. So I kneeled beside Jalen, brushing his curls back from his forehead and whispering, "You are safe now, and you did nothing wrong." And he looked up at me through tear-blurred eyes, clutching the guitar straps like a lifeline, and I felt a fierce determination surge through my veins. A determination born from years of calculated patience, of building a fortress of investments and silent influence I had labeled Plan Indigo, the project I had nurtured in secret so that no one could ever threaten my son again. When I rose, I left Jalen to rest and walked to my study, where the soft glow of my computer awaited me. Papers and folders bearing code names filled the shelves, but one folder in particular, the encrypted folder I had never shown to anyone, held the key to everything I had constructed: ownership stakes in the school, board meeting minutes, property deeds, and funding agreements that tied every facet of Northgrove Learning Trust to my name, albeit through layers of shell companies and holding entities designed to obscure the true power behind the institution. And as I opened the folder, I felt the familiar thrill of control, the knowledge that every share, every percentage point, was a brick in the wall I had built around my family, and now the wall would become a weapon, not for vengeance but for justice. The hum of the hard drive spun up as I reviewed the plan I had crafted. First, secure the loyalty of key staff members with grants and scholarships. Second, ensure that the board held no member who could act without my consent. Third, maintain operational autonomy so that the school's administration answered only to me in times of crisis. And finally, deploy the ultimate measure of authority, public transparency of ownership, to turn the tables on anyone who thought they could trample on my son with impunity. Isla's footsteps behind me were soft but insistent, and she placed a trembling hand on my shoulder, her breath hitching as she pleaded, "Noel, please, don't do anything reckless. There's still family." I met her gaze, my own eyes cold but resolute, and answered quietly, "They struck my son. Family or not, cruelty has no place here." I closed the folder, sealing the digital vault, and said, "We'll handle this on my terms." Isla's face crumpled in anguish as though I had stabbed her altruism, but she said nothing further. Instead, she retreated down the hallway, leaving me alone with the soft glow of the screen and the weight of the choice I was about to make. In the morning, I would reveal my hand, but tonight I allowed myself just a moment of reflection. The silence I had maintained for so many years had been mistaken for weakness by those who abused their privilege. But in reality, it had been the breath before the storm, the calm inside the hurricane, and now the storm would be unleashed. I shut down the computer and walked back to the living room, where Jalen lay curled beneath a blanket, guitar case resting like a sentinel beside him. I sat down quietly and placed my hand on his, letting him grip my fingers as though they were lifelines, and he whispered, "Dad, what if they hate me forever?" My throat tightened, but I held his gaze firmly and replied, "They will learn to respect you, and if they refuse, they will stand alone." I tucked the blanket around him and kissed his forehead, feeling the soft warmth of his skin beneath my lips, and I promised him silently that no one would ever have power over his self-worth again. In that moment, I became not just a father but a guardian and a strategist, a man willing to leverage every asset, every hidden agreement, every silent investment to ensure that my son's dignity would endure, even if it meant dismantling the illusions built by his mother's family. As I turned off the lights and closed the door behind me, the words of Plan Indigo echoed in my mind. Silence is not weakness. It is the moment before you strike. And strike I would, not with anger or spite, but with the precision of a quiet man who had spent years laying the groundwork for this very hour. The blueprint for our future lay before me in that encrypted folder, and tomorrow I would walk into the daylight and begin to use the power I had amassed to protect what mattered most. Because no one, including family, had the right to break my son's spirit again. Morning light filtered through the blinds as I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cooling beside the encrypted folder whose contents had already begun to churn the day into something unrecognizable, and my phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, tweets, messages, and voicemails from parents and teachers reacting to the viral clip that had exploded online overnight. Jalen's face, frozen in shock as Bradley's hand met his cheek, was everywhere. Local news, social media feeds, neighborhood group chats. I felt a surge of protective fury, but beneath it lay a quieter satisfaction. For the first time, everyone knew exactly what had happened. I glanced down at my suit jacket, still neatly pressed from the gala the night before, and realized this was no longer just a family matter. It was corporate governance at its most personal. Isla appeared behind me, shoulders hunched, eyes red from sleepless worry, and she whispered, "Noel, what are we going to do about all this?" I looked at her, at the woman I still loved despite every fracture in our life, and said, "We're going to finish what we started." By 8 o'clock, I was in my office, a paneled room overlooking the school grounds, where rows of empty desks waited for the day's classes, and the lobby beyond bore the echoes of last night's chaos. I tapped open my laptop, unlocked the folder, and prepared the evidence packet. Screenshots of ownership records, board minutes showing my voting control, the chain of title proving my stake in every aspect of Northgrove Learning Trust. I didn't need to hide in the shadows any longer. At precisely 9, I walked into the auditorium again, this time flanked by the head of security and 2 administrators who knew better than to question me. The stage lights were harsh and artificial, but I had grown accustomed to commanding them. Teachers and students filed in, murmuring in clusters. Bradley slunk into his usual seat at the front, a mixture of hatred and defiance contorting his face. Harold remained conspicuously at his side, puffing his chest as though the day belonged to him, still believing that patriarchal privilege would shield him from disgrace. I stepped onto the stage, feeling the weight of every eye on my back. The hum of the microphone under my tie tickled my collarbone as I tapped it. "Good morning," I began, voice calm but carrying enough authority to still the room. "I am Noel Marlowe. You know me as a parent, perhaps as Jalen's father. Today, you will know me as the majority shareholder and CEO of the Northgrove Learning Trust." A collective intake of breath swept through the audience, audible as a gust of wind across the wooden floor. I allowed the moment to linger, letting people digest the revelation that the quiet man who walked among them held the reins of power. Then I clicked the remote. The projector whirred to life, casting a bright rectangle onto the screen behind me. The first image was Bradley's face twisted in cruel amusement. The next, Jalen's stunned expression. The final frame captured Harold's smirk. Then the video played, the slap sounding crisp as winter air, Bradley's laughter hollow as a cracked bell, Harold's voice dripping contempt. Well, he needed to learn some shame. Gasps echoed off the walls. I watched Bradley's hand twitch at his side, powerless for the first time, and Harold's smirk melt into disbelief. When the clip ended, I advanced to the edge of the stage and leaned forward, voice as quiet as a surgeon's scalpel. "That recording was made on school property, on equipment you all maintain. It's audible to every student, staff member, and parent in this district, which means the trust one placed in family boundaries was misplaced. Shame should not be inflicted on a child learning to find his voice." I turned slowly toward Bradley. "Effective immediately, your role as athletics director is terminated. Your access to all school facilities is revoked, and payroll has been suspended pending review." Bradley sprang to his feet, face red, but before he could speak, I held up a hand. "Family or not, no one here is above accountability." Then I looked to Harold. "As trustee emeritus, you have neglected your advisory duties for years. Your pension payments will be halted until you attend mandatory sessions on child welfare and professional boundaries, sessions I will personally oversee." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Some parents scribbled notes, students exchanged alarmed glances. Teachers straightened, uncertain whether to applaud or protest. I stepped back and allowed the silence to fill the space. "Finally," I said, "this institution exists to nurture young minds, not perpetuate cycles of fear and humiliation. We will implement a new code of conduct, an anonymous reporting system, and professional training for every adult on these premises. We start today. Then I closed my laptop, signaling the end of the spectacle. The microphone clicked off, leaving an echo that felt like a promise. As I descended the stage, I felt the tension drain from my shoulders and resolve take its place. Jalen's future was no longer dependent on mercy or apology. It was secured by systems and policies too robust for bullies to penetrate. In the parking lot afterward, I found Jalen waiting, guitar slung over his back, eyes bright with relief and pride. He slipped his hand into mine, and I knew that by making the truth public, I had given him far more than justice. I had given him a legacy of integrity and the knowledge that, when the world tried to silence him, his father would be there to amplify his voice. The auditorium's air felt colder than before, as though the chandeliers themselves recoiled from Bradley's presence, and I stood beneath the harsh lights, watching him hesitate at the edge of the stage where only moments ago I had delivered my verdict. His shoulders sagged in disbelief as the realization sank in that family ties no longer shielded him from consequence, and I could almost feel the weight of every skeptical gaze measuring his fall from grace. The moment stretched, and I let it sit heavy in the silence, savoring the clarity that came from absolute authority. Then, with steady steps, I crossed the stage and stood directly in front of Bradley, eyes locked on his, heart pounding with the gravity of what I was about to do. His face was pale, lips parted, as if he might sputter a defense, but no words came. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the official termination notice, crisp and stamped with the seal of Northgrove Learning Trust. The paper felt cool against my fingertips, a tangible symbol of the power I had wielded behind the scenes for so long. I slid it across the polished wood podium. "Bradley," I said, voice calm but carrying the weight of steel under velvet, effective immediately, you were relieved of your duties as the athletics director of Northgrove Learning Trust. Your access to all school facilities and digital systems is revoked, and your pay has been frozen pending an audit of your conduct. I paused to ensure he read every line, to let him feel the finality of each word. He snatched the paper up and read it aloud, voice cracking on the words frozen and revoked. A murmur rippled through the audience. Teachers exchanged glances. Students leaned forward. Parents whispered fervently. I held up a hand to still the rising clamor. "Family or not," I continued, "no one in this institution is exempt from our commitment to safety, respect, and integrity. Your behavior last night was unacceptable, and I will not tolerate anyone who inflicts shame on our children." Bradley's jaw tightened, and he stammered, "You can't do this. I'm family." His plea hung in the air, desperate and hollow. I met his gaze evenly. Family does not grant impunity. It is a bond built on trust and responsibility. You betrayed that trust. Now, leave the stage. Security officers moved forward, their discreet badges catching the light. Bradley stepped back, hand trembling as he folded the termination notice and tucked it into his coat pocket. He cast a look at Harold, who sat frozen in his chair, and it was clear that the old man had no answers that could save either of them. As Bradley descended the steps, shoulders hunched, I addressed the audience once more. Let today mark a new era for Northgrove Learning Trust. One where accountability is absolute, and where every adult here understands that our first duty is to protect our students, not to protect each other. I turned to face Harold, whose smirk had long since vanished, replaced by shock and fury. The man who once sat on the advisory board with impunity now found himself exposed. I clicked the remote in my hand, and the projector flickered back to life, displaying a slide titled Trustee Accountability. Beneath it appeared the minutes from board meetings showing Harold's absenteeism, followed by a list of policies he had ignored and memos he had failed to respond to. Then, in bold red letters, another notice, Trustee Benefits Suspended. I watched as Harold's knuckles whitened around the armrest. "Harold," I said, voice low but clear enough for every ear in the hall to catch, "you have not attended a single advisory meeting in the past 2 years. Despite receiving full pension benefits, you have failed to contribute to the governance of this institution. Effective immediately, your trustee emeritus status is suspended, and your pension payments will be withheld pending a formal review of your contributions." He sat rigid, mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for water. Finally, he croaked, "You can't do that." "I've earned," I interrupted him with a single, pointed glance, Your status and benefits are privileges extended by this trust, not entitlements. Should you wish to resume your role, you will attend mandatory training on ethical leadership and child welfare, sessions I will oversee personally. The auditorium fell silent, the only sound the faint humming of the projector. Harold bowed his head, the weight of his own disgrace settling on him like a shroud. I lowered the remote and stepped away from the podium, signaling the end of our confrontation. Teachers began gathering their things. Students exchanged excited whispers. Parents rose, some applauding under their breath at the long-overdue reckoning. Bradley lingered at the edge of the stage, eyes downcast, until a security officer gently but firmly guided him toward the exit. I watched him go, feeling a surge of relief and sorrow intertwined. Relief that justice had been served, sorrow at the ruin of familial bonds that once seemed unbreakable. Yet I knew this was necessary. I had promised Jalen a fortress of protection, and no one, no matter their relation, would be allowed to breach it again. As the crowd dispersed, I gathered my jacket and notes and walked off the stage with measured steps, greeting teachers who offered nods of gratitude and parents who extended silent, supportive smiles. In the hallway, the head of security approached. "Sir, the board wants to meet this afternoon to formalize your actions." I nodded. "Arrange it, and prepare the documentation for public release." He saluted and departed. I found Isla waiting by the exit doors, hands folded, eyes brimming with tears and pride. She opened her mouth, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she reached for my hand and squeezed it. I squeezed back, feeling the solidity of our alliance in that simple gesture. Together, we walked out into the spring sunshine, the weight of what had happened still heavy, but the promise of a new beginning shining bright. Beneath the veneer of victory lay the real work. Rebuilding trust, implementing safeguards, and ensuring this school became the safe harbor I had vowed it would be. And I would not rest until every child within these walls knew they had a father and a school leader who would stand between them and the storm. They wasted no time spinning the narrative once they were forced off the stage. That same afternoon, Harold appeared on WNGT Talk Radio, his voice trembling with indignation as he painted me as an overreactive son-in-law and Bradley as a victim of a hypersensitive school administration. I listened from my office, arms folded across my chest, as he insisted that the slap was a tough love lesson meant to buck Jalen up for life's harsh realities. He tried to portray Jalen as the real bully, claiming my son had been showboating on stage, taunting his own family, and provoking Bradley's necessary correction. His words slithered through the airwaves like oil, seeking to stick to any listener naive enough to accept his version. Meanwhile, Bradley uploaded a clarifying video to his social channels, in which he sat in a dimly lit living room, wrists bared to show there were no bruises, and spoke in measured tones about forgiveness, family misunderstandings, and the pressures of performance anxiety. He feigned regret for the publicity but couched it in self-pity, claiming his own reputation had been unfairly tarnished. Students forwarded me screenshots of comments under his post. Dozens of supporters rallying behind him, calling him the real casualty and urging that Noel Marlowe's power play be exposed. I watched each clip, each post, each attempt to rewrite history, and felt the familiar rise of protective fire. They thought that by controlling the narrative, they could smother the truth. They were wrong. That evening, Isla found me in the study, where the soft glow of multiple screens displayed graphs of social sentiment analysis and news mentions. She bit her lip, eyes rimmed red, and whispered, "They're destroying our son's reputation." Her words landed like stones in my chest. "They're trying," I said, voice low, "but they're fighting against facts." I tapped a folder marked Evidence Archive and opened a subfolder labeled Pattern of Abuse. In it were emails from Bradley to colleagues boasting of his discipline tactics, memos from Harold dismissing teacher complaints about favoritism, and recordings of confidential board discussions in which they treated Jalen and other students as liabilities. I turned the screen toward Isla. "Look," I said gently, "they've been doing this for years, disguising cruelty as mentorship, smothering dissent with threats of disgrace." She leaned in, scrolling through the documents, and her face drained of color. "Why didn't you show me any of this?" she asked, voice trembling. I closed the folder. Because until now, they stayed under the radar. But when they struck Jalen on stage, they revealed themselves completely. Now everyone can see their legacy of cowardice. Isla nodded, wiping a stray tear. That night I drafted a statement for the press, not an apology or a retraction, but a declaration of truth. I uploaded it to our official school portal and social channels. A brief preamble reminding the community of our mission, followed by hyperlinks to the viral clip and the evidence archive. I closed with an invitation for any staff, student, or parent who had experienced cover-ups or intimidation to come forward, promising full confidentiality and immediate investigation. By morning, the statement had spread beyond the district, picked up by local news outlets hungry for a story about power, privilege, and generational conflict. Reporters filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the board minutes I had shared, and anchors debated on live television whether family ties should ever override a child's right to safety and respect. I watched from home as Isla paced the living room, phone in hand, fielding calls from her side of the family begging her to intervene, to ask me to show mercy and let bygones be bygones. My wife arrived at noon, standing in the doorway of my study, shoulders squared despite the turmoil in her eyes. "Noelle, please," she said, voice firm. "You're destroying them, my father and my brother. Can't you just call this over?" I closed my laptop and met her gaze. "I'm not destroying them," I replied. "They destroyed themselves the moment they believed they could shame my son, and then silence me. All I'm doing is making what was hidden visible." She shook her head, tears brimming. "They're still my family." My heart ached for her divided loyalties, but my resolve held. "They mistook quiet for weakness," I said softly. But quiet was never my weakness. It was the foundation of the reckoning. The following day, an unexpected message arrived. A handwritten note slipped under my front door in an unmarked envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately, Harold's spidery script. The note read, "Noelle, you were right. I failed my grandson and my daughter. My apologies cannot undo my mistakes, but I hope they can be the first step toward healing. I understand if you cannot forgive, but I hope, in time, Jalen will." I stood in the foyer, the note trembling in my hand. Forgiveness was not mine to grant, nor was it the point of this exercise. Justice was. But even justice, administered with cold precision, needed a human face. I tucked the note into my jacket pocket and sent a brief reply via secure channel. "I accept your apology. Healing is earned, not given. We will speak when Jalen is ready." In the days that followed, more voices joined the chorus. Former students came forward with stories of favoritism, intimidation, and humiliation that Bradley and Harold had inflicted over years, stories that had never seen daylight until now. Teachers provided sworn affidavits of complaints they had filed but which board leaders had ignored. The local school board convened an emergency session to vote on new governance measures, and the superintendent publicly announced an independent audit of Northgrove Learning Trust practices. Through it all, Jalen watched from the sidelines, his curiosity mixing with cautious hope. One evening he asked me, "Dad, did you know all this has been happening?" I knelt beside him on the couch, brushing the curl from his forehead. "I suspected," I said, "but I found the proof because I refused to let the shame become the story." He nodded slowly, eyes bright. "I'm sorry they did that to me." I hugged him tight. "They did it. You didn't deserve it." But sometimes, the hardest thing is showing people that their cruelty has consequences. As Chapter 5 closed on our shared victories and ongoing battles, I realized that exposing a legacy of cowardice was only the beginning. The real work of rebuilding trust between families, staff, and the entire community lay ahead. But for the first time, the path forward was lit by unflinching truth, and I knew we would walk it together. The morning air was crisp and carried the faint scent of damp grass as I drove onto campus, feeling the tension in my chest tighten like a vice. By now, the fallout from Bradley and Harold's disgrace had rippled through every corner of Northgrove Learning Trust, and I knew today's assembly would determine whether our community would embrace true accountability or retreat into whispered defenses. As I stepped out of the car, I straightened my tie and set my jaw. Isla had pleaded with me last night to call off the press coverage, her voice cracking with fear that I would push the family beyond repair, but I had refused. Silence had protected monsters far too long, and nothing short of full transparency could cleanse the rot. I greeted the new head of student engagement, Dr. Amara Lewis, whose calm presence had become a pillar of healing in recent weeks. She gave me a reassuring nod as we walked toward the auditorium doors, where a throng of students, parents, and staff gathered under a banner reading Truth, Trust, Transformation. Reporters lined the back row, lenses poised like vultures. I ascended the stage alone, feeling the hum of anticipation ripple through the crowd. The microphone crackled, and I allowed the moment to settle in before speaking. "Good afternoon," I began, voice measured. Yesterday, Bradley and Harold issued personal apologies in separate forums. Today, we will hear them here, in front of this community. A murmur swept through the audience. Some parents exchanged uneasy glances, students sat rigid, and a cluster of Bradley's former colleagues shifted uncomfortably. I continued, "This is not a spectacle. It is a step toward accountability. An apology is only as meaningful as the actions that follow." With that, I motioned to the side of the stage. Bradley appeared first, wearing a gray suit that hung awkwardly on his stiff shoulders. He approached the podium with hesitant steps, gaze cast downward as he cleared his throat. The hush deepened. I owe this community an apology. What I did to Jalen was unforgivable," he began, voice trembling. He paused, swallowing hard as he tried to maintain composure under the weight of every watchful eye. "I struck a child in front of his peers and family. No amount of tough love or tradition excuses that." His words were simple, but the silence that followed felt like a verdict. I watched his reflection in the polished lectern, noting the subtle trembling of his hands. After a moment, he lifted his head, eyes scanning the audience as though searching for redemption. "I am committed to making amends. I will undergo sensitivity training, and I volunteer to lead workshops on respectful conduct for all staff." A ripple of surprise spread through the crowd. Some parents nodded approvingly. Others clenched their jaws, as though still unsure. Bradley stepped back, relief and shame mingling on his face, and I offered a brief, formal nod. Next, Harold approached the podium, cane in hand and shoulders stooped. He wore his usual tweed jacket, now dusted with a fragility I had never seen before. The smirk was gone. In its place lay a man unmasked by consequence. He cleared his throat, voice raspy but earnest. "I have lived too long believing that name and privilege could shield me from accountability. I see now how that belief harmed my grandson, my daughter, and this entire community." He paused, closing his eyes as though gathering courage. "I apologize to Jalen, to Noel, and to every student who deserved better from me. I will serve on the advisory board again only if I can commit to attending every meeting, supporting every student, and mentoring with compassion rather than condescension." I watched the assemblies of emotions on his face, regret, humility, and a flicker of hope. As he stepped away, a few teachers quietly applauded, and I sensed a cautious optimism taking root. Stepping back to the center of the stage, I raised a hand for silence. "Thank you, Bradley and Harold, for those words. An apology is the first step. The next step is sustained change." I clicked the remote in my hand, and the projector flickered to life with a new slide titled Accountability Actions. Beneath it appeared bullet points: mandatory conduct workshops, anonymous reporting channels, board attendance requirements, periodic reviews of trustee and staff performance, and a community oversight committee that included parent and student representatives. Each item was carefully worded, reflecting months of planning hidden behind Plan Indigo's framework. I spoke deliberately. "These measures will take effect immediately. They are non-negotiable. We will not rely on goodwill alone. We will embed accountability into our operations. Anyone, regardless of title or family ties, who violates these standards will face swift review." A ripple of approval surged through the audience. Cameras clicked. Parents exchanged relieved glances. Staff straightened with renewed pride, as though a weight they didn't fully acknowledge had lifted from their shoulders. Students leaned forward, some whispering excitedly among themselves. I felt the electricity of transformation crackle in the air. Then, to close the assembly, I offered a final promise. I pledge to this community that silence will never again be my default. I will continue to listen, to act, and to uphold a culture where every voice matters, regardless of age or relation. Today, we turn a corner, from covering up shame to cultivating strength. I clicked the remote off, stepped down from the podium, and made my way through the aisles, shaking hands and exchanging nods. I paused by Jalen, who sat with Isla on a front row bench, his eyes shining with pride. He hugged me tight, whispering, "You did it, Dad." I squeezed him, feeling every ounce of fatherly love and satisfaction. As the crowd dispersed, I joined Dr. Lewis in the hallway. She offered a knowing smile and said, "You made them speak their truth today." I nodded, heart full. "And now we build on it," I replied. The corridor buzzed with conversation about new policies and fresh starts. Parents and students clustered around the tables where counselors and administrators stood ready to assist. Reports of the assembly spread across social media within minutes, framed as a model for institutional accountability nationwide. I paused at the exit, taking in the scene. A community engaged, empowered, and no longer shackled by fear. In that moment, I understood that justice was more than retribution. It was the creation of a culture where respect and transparency thrived. Isla appeared beside me, leaning into my arm. "Thank you," she said softly. I kissed her forehead gently and replied, "Thank you for trusting me when I refused to stay silent." Together, we walked into the spring sunlight, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Confident that with truth, trust, and unwavering resolve, North Grove Learning Trust would become the fortress of voice and integrity we envisioned. By the time Monday rolled around, the tremors of our reckoning had rippled far beyond the auditorium walls, and I found myself waking before dawn with Jalen's question echoing in my mind. Were we prepared for the fallout they never saw coming? The night before, I had reviewed the overnight media coverage. Articles on news websites, threads on parenting forums, segments on morning talk shows, and everywhere I looked, my family's scandal was the centerpiece. Reporters quoted experts debating the responsibilities of school owners, lawyers speculating on liability, and community members weighing in with hashtags like #ProtectOurKids and #AccountabilityOverPrivilege. I scanned the comments beneath a particularly scathing op-ed, smiling when I saw a parent write, "No more closed-door deals." This is the transparency we needed, and a teacher add, "I feel safe telling the truth now." Yet amid the praise there were warnings. Critics accusing me of abusing my power, claiming that I had weaponized corporate control for personal vengeance. Some dubbed my actions a hostile takeover of the family, and others questioned whether any apology from Bradley or Harold was genuine or merely coerced by fear of financial ruin. As I sipped my black coffee in the kitchen, Isla appeared with steaming mugs, her eyes weary from sleepless nights spent fielding calls from both sides of her divided family. She placed a hand on my shoulder and whispered, "You knew this would spill over. Are you ready for the next wave?" I nodded, feeling a swell of resolve. "The truth always carries a cost," I said, "but silence has an even greater one." Later, in my office, I convened an emergency meeting with the school's leadership team. Dr. Amara Lewis, the head of security, the new communications director, and our legal counsel. The conference room smelled of stale air and determination. I laid out a detailed plan to manage the crisis and solidify our reforms. First, we would launch a dedicated hotline and email address for students and staff to report any misconduct, ensuring anonymous submissions would be protected by federal whistleblower statutes. Second, we would publish monthly transparency reports detailing incidents, investigations, and resolutions. Third, we would host community forums in each district school, inviting parents, students, and staff to voice concerns and suggest policy improvements. As I spoke, I felt the familiar surge of control. Plan Indigo had evolved from a private shield into a public blueprint for institutional integrity, and I watched the team take notes, their faces alight with purpose. By mid-morning, the first challenge arrived. A former colleague of Bradley's from the athletic department sent a letter threatening litigation on Bradley's behalf, claiming wrongful termination and defamation. The letter was courteous on its face, but laced with legalese and the promise of a costly settlement. I skimmed the letter, feeling neither surprise nor regret. This was an inevitable maneuver from a man who believed he could bully his way through consequences. I forwarded the letter to our counsel with instructions to draft a firm response outlining our documented evidence and to prepare for discovery requests. Then I turned my attention to a technical crisis. The school's website had been flooded with fake accounts posting inflammatory comments, demanding Bradley's reinstatement and accusing me of corporate overreach. Our communications director recommended a temporary shutdown of comment functions, while the IT manager proposed a firewall to block suspected trolls. I weighed the risk of appearing censorious against the necessity of maintaining a constructive dialogue. "We will disable comments but replace them with a moderated forum," I decided. We won't silence voices, but we will ensure civility and truth. By lunchtime, I walked through the hallways of North Grove Middle School, greeting students and teachers who offered quiet nods of solidarity. A cluster of sixth graders waved enthusiastically. One held a handmade sign reading, "Marlowe means accountability." I lifted the sign with a grin and whispered, "Keep speaking up." A teacher caught my eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Each gesture reminded me that the stakes were not just my family's reputation, but the safety and dignity of every child who passed through these doors. In the principal's office, I paused before a framed photograph of Jalen at last year's science fair, smiling beside his grandfather. The memory stung, the warmth of family diluted by betrayal, but also fueled my conviction: no child should ever face humiliation in silence. I straightened and walked out, determined to weather the storm. That afternoon, the local school board held its emergency session. I attended publicly, sitting in the back row rather than behind the dais, to demonstrate transparency. As the board chair summarized our reforms, I watched Harold and Bradley sit at a separate table, shoulders slumped, faces drawn. Neither addressed the board directly. Instead, they listened as parents read testimony about past abuses and as administrators detailed the new oversight measures. When the vote came to formally adopt our accountability policies, it passed unanimously. Applause rose, echoing through the chambers, and I felt a surge of vindication tempered by the gravity of the moment. It was not a triumph over family, but a triumph of principle over privilege. On the drive home, Isla reached over and clasped my hand. "They never saw this coming," she said softly. "No, they never did," I replied. That evening, Jalen bounded down the hallway to greet me with a clammy hug. He had spent the day with Dr. Lewis, helping her interview classmates for the student engagement program. "Dad," he said, eyes bright, "kids told me they felt safe talking to me. They want to help change the school, too." I held him tight, pride and love coursing through me. "You started this, son. You gave everyone permission to stand up." As I tucked him into bed, he asked, "Will Uncle Bradley ever come back?" I paused, considering the right words. If he truly learns to respect others and works to earn that trust, then maybe one day. But only if he shows up and asks with humility, not entitlement. He nodded, eyes heavy with sleep, and whispered, "I understand." After I switched off the light, I sat in the quiet living room reflecting on our journey. From a single slap that echoed across the district to a community galvanized by accountability. The fallout had been fierce: legal threats, social media storms, family fractures, but through it all we had upheld our values and emerged stronger. I realized that the aftermath of reckoning was not just about punishment, but about renewal, a rebirth of the institution we had built brick by brick. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, perhaps endless debate, perhaps more attempts to rewrite history. But tonight, I felt the satisfaction of knowing we had reshaped our destiny. The truth would continue to resonate, a clarion call that even the most entrenched systems could be transformed by one father's refusal to let silence stand in the face of injustice. And with that thought, I rose, switched off the last lamp, and prepared to rest, ready to face whatever came with unwavering resolve and the knowledge that our legacy was now in the hands of a community empowered to speak its truth. I walked onto the freshly painted courtyard just as the morning bell rang. The sound of sneakers on concrete and animated chatter of students greeting each other filling the air with a sense of energy I had not felt before this storm began. And in that moment, I realized the transformation I had spearheaded was no longer an abstract ideal, but a living, breathing reality. The banners reading "Your voice matters" and "Speak up, stand strong" fluttered gently in the spring breeze, their bold lettering a testament to the new era we had ushered in. As I stepped through the gates, I paused to admire the changes: the bright mural painted by students on the sidewall, depicting a phoenix rising from embers, symbolizing our collective journey from humiliation to empowerment. The cluster of rumor trees, small saplings where students pinned anonymous notes about concerns or suggestions for improvement. The statue of Lady Justice in the center circle, holding scales balanced with books and a microphone, reflecting our commitment to fairness and free expression. I ran a hand along the polished bronze plaque at the statue's base, engraved with the school motto we had adopted, "Fortress of Voice and Integrity." It felt warm under my fingertips, as though the plaque itself pulsed with the heartbeat of every student who had found their courage here. I breathed deeply and proceeded toward the main entrance, where Dr. Lewis waited, clipboard in hand and a welcome smile on her face. "Morning, Noel," she said, her tone warm but professional. "We have a new counselor joining today, and a freshman orientation group eager to share feedback on the anonymous reporting system." I nodded, the weight of my office suddenly light with pride. "Let them in," I replied, and we strode together through the doors, passing hall monitors who greeted us with coordinated nods, a subtle signal we had established to reinforce community solidarity. Inside the lobby, I noticed a bulletin board featuring testimonials from students and parents. One read, "I used the hotline to report bullying." 2 days later, I saw changes. Another declared, "I felt safe for the first time," and yet another praised the transparent monthly reports displayed in the glass cases along the hallway. I stopped to read each one, my heart swelling at the realization that our policies had not only been implemented but embraced by those they served. A group of 10th graders clustered nearby, clutching tablets as they prepared to record a segment for the school's new student-led podcast, Voices of North Grove, where they interviewed peers about leadership, equity, and the power of speaking out. I offered them a thumbs up, and they returned it eagerly, one calling out, "Thanks for letting us lead, Principal Marlowe." I couldn't help but grin. This was the essence of the fortress we had built. Students at the center, wielding their voices to shape an institution that listened. As I approached my office, I passed Bradley, now volunteering in the after-school sports program as part of his rehabilitation. He nodded awkwardly, eyes downcast, carrying 2 basketballs as he guided a group of younger students demonstrating shots. I paused and watched as he gently corrected one child's form, offering encouragement rather than derision. The transformation in him was not complete, but it was visible. His posture was less defensive, his tone softer. I gave him a quiet nod of acknowledgement, and he offered a tentative smile before turning back to his team. Next to him, Jalen cheered from the sidelines, acting as the junior director of student engagement, clipboard in hand and stopwatch around his neck, timing drills and handing out water bottles. He caught my eye and waved. I waved back, pride surging knowing that he had not only survived his ordeal but thrived in the environment we had collectively forged. Inside my office, I settled behind my desk stacked with policy proposals, parent questionnaires, and academic plans. Isla's hot chocolate sat at the edge of the surface, left from a brief morning visit. I sipped it and reviewed the day's agenda. A meeting with the Community Oversight Committee to refine quarterly goals, a lunch with the Student Leadership Council to discuss peer mediation training, and an afternoon session with the board to finalize our budget for expanded counseling services. Each item was a tangible step forward, a guarantee that our fortress remained dynamic and responsive. The door opened, and Dr. Lewis entered with a file folder labeled New Counselor Onboarding. She smiled and said, "We've got great candidates. Their backgrounds in trauma-informed care align perfectly with our vision." I leaned back and nodded thoughtfully, feeling the solidity of our team's commitment. "Let's bring them in," I said. She sighed in relief. "This place has become a magnet for passionate educators." I shrugged modestly. We offered a sanctuary for voices long suppressed. Unsurprisingly, people drawn to that mission want to be here. After she left, I rose and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard. The rumor trees now bore dozens of brightly colored notes, and small clusters of students huddled beneath them, reading or adding their own thoughts. One senior girl paused to read a note thoughtfully, then tore off a blank slip and wrote something new, pinning it carefully. I thought of the boy who had first slipped his anxious note onto the tree weeks earlier, his quiet plea for a safe space to discuss grief after losing a parent. And how the counseling staff had responded within hours, setting up a support group. That was the power of our policies, swift action feeding genuine change. My phone buzzed with a text from the board chair, confirming that our next public transparency report would feature metrics on hotline usage, counseling sessions, and staff training completion rates. The text ended with, "Your leadership is transforming North Grove into a model for schools everywhere." I paused, reflecting on the journey from a single, humiliating incident to this thriving ecosystem of accountability and care. It had demanded unwavering resolve, the willingness to wield influence for good, and the courage to expose uncomfortable truths. But watching this fortress of voice take shape, I knew every sacrifice had been worth it. I pocketed my phone and prepared to dive into the day's work. As I left my office, I passed through the hallway where students paused to greet me with smiles and respectful nods. A teacher intercepted me to say, "Thank you for listening," And another added, "You've changed our lives." I nodded, gratitude warming my chest. In the music room, the guitar club convened, laughter and chords weaving through the air, a stark contrast to the silence that once dominated these halls. I lingered to hear Jalen's gentle introduction of a young student preparing for her first performance, proof that our fortress of voice protected the creative spirit as much as it shielded the vulnerable. Exiting into the bright afternoon sun, I surveyed the campus one last time before heading to the Oversight Committee meeting. The fortress we built was not made of stone or steel but of policies, people, and an unshakable belief that every voice deserves to be heard. And as long as I served as its guardian, no force, neither fear nor tradition, would shutter its gates again. The holiday lights had barely been taken down when Isla approached me in the study, her eyes haunted by the unspoken conflict between loyalty and justice. She stood framed by the soft glow of the desk lamp, shoulders squared but trembling ever so slightly, as though she carried the weight of two worlds on her back. "Noel," she began, voice tight, "I need to talk about Christmas." I looked up from the spreadsheet I'd been drafting, budget allocations for expanded counseling services, and saw the sorrow etched into her face. She continued, "My parents have invited me to spend the holidays at their house. They say they're working on forgiveness. They want a fresh start." My heart clenched. The very idea that she would subject herself again to the people who had publicly shamed our son made me ache for her, and for Jalen, who would be left to celebrate without his mother. I set the papers aside and gestured for her to sit. "They hurt Jalen," I said quietly. "They hurt our family." Isla nodded, tears glinting in her eyes. "I know, but they're still my family. And Jalen is our son." I thought time and their apologies might heal something. The fatal lure of time and apologies, I realized, was exactly what had allowed the legacy of shame to fester in the first place. But I also understood the complexity of her ties. Her upbringing, the years of filial duty, the hollow notion that blood should supersede morality. I rose and walked to the window overlooking the courtyard, now silent beneath a blanket of fallen leaves, the rumor trees bare but still standing as silent sentinels. "Isla," I said without turning, "if you go back there, you'll be stepping into their world again. One misstep, one tone-deaf comment, and our reform can unravel." She flinched, and I knew I had struck a chord of fear she hadn't fully acknowledged. "I'm not asking them to live here," she replied, voice thick with resolve. "I just want to see if we can find peace." Peace. The word tasted bitter on my tongue, tainted by the memory of humiliation. "Their version of peace," I said, "is reconciliation on their terms. They haven't earned ours." She wiped an errant tear and pressed her fingertips to her lips. "What about me?" she whispered. "I'm torn between the sister and daughter I was raised to be and the wife and mother I chose to be." In that moment, I saw beyond the spouse whose trust one had shattered and rebuilt into something stronger. I saw a woman caught between contradictory duties, each demanding loyalty. I closed the distance between us and took her hands in mine, feeling the trembling beneath her skin. "You have the right to choose," I said softly. "But know this. You will never find true peace in a house built on shame. Jalen deserves consistency, dignity, and the assurance that his parents stand united in protecting him." She drew a shaky breath, pressing her palms into mine. "I don't want to choose sides, Noel." "Then choose right," I replied. "Choose the side that honors your vows, not your lineage." The room fell silent but for the soft hum of the city beyond the window. I could see in her eyes the battle being waged between ancestral obligation and the new values we had forged together. At last, she closed her eyes and nodded. "I'll stay with you," she said, voice almost inaudible. "With Jalen. I see now that leaving would feel like a betrayal." Relief and pride washed through me, mingling with regret for the conflict I had forced upon her. I pulled her into my arms, and we stood together in the quiet study, the only sound our synchronized breathing. Over her shoulder, I noticed the stack of family holiday cards on my desk, sentiments of love that had masked years of cruelty. I gathered them up and tucked them into a drawer, a small symbolic gesture that our future would no longer depend on hollow niceties. "It won't be easy," I murmured into her hair. "Family dynamics rarely are. But whatever happens, we face it together." She tilted her head, and I kissed her temple, tasting salt and resolve. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving me the choice." In that moment, I understood that power without empathy was empty, and that our fortress of voice and integrity would only stand if we honored each other's voices, even when they trembled between duty and conviction. Later that evening, as I prepared for a board meeting, I found Jalen in the hallway beneath the fading light. He looked up at me with hopeful eyes and asked, "Is Mom coming to the holiday concert?" I smiled gently, ruffling his hair. "Yes," I said, as firmly as if I were proclaiming a new policy. "She's here to stay." His grin lit his face, and he threw his arms around me. In his warmth, I found my certainty reinforced. Love and integrity, once earned, would guide every choice we made, and no tradition, no bloodline, could ever trump the vow to protect our son's dignity. That night, I drafted a new family agreement, an informal pact of mutual respect and commitment. Knowing that our greatest legacy would be the values we chose to embody, not the names we were born to bear. 6 months after the spring showcase, I stood at the threshold of the new Marlowe Center for Youth Integrity and Arts, its gleaming glass facade reflecting the sunrise like a promise reborn. The center rose on land donated by Northgrove Learning Trust, a testament to our commitment to transforming pain into purpose. Beside me, Jalen's small hand slipped into mine, and I felt the familiar spark of pride I'd carried since the day he first lifted his guitar. Today wasn't about retribution or boardroom battles. It was about renewal, about what could blossom when we refused to let shame define us. A gentle breeze carried the laughter of children streaming through the center's open doors, their faces alight with the same curiosity and hope that had once trembled in Jalen's eyes. Parents and community leaders gathered on the plaza, clutching programs printed with the center's mission to amplify silenced voices through art, music, and advocacy. Reporters' cameras lined the edge of the crowd, ready to capture the ribbon-cutting moment that would headline tomorrow's news. I drew a steadying breath, brushing my suit lapel clean of metaphorical dust, and turned to Jalen. His grin was wide, toothy, unguarded, the grin of a boy who had faced humiliation and rediscovered joy. He raised a pair of golden scissors with ceremonial flourish and modeled them for the cameras. "Ready, Dad?" he asked, voice steady. I nodded, knelt to his level, and whispered, "Let's open the future." Together, we cut the ribbon, its red strands falling away like the last vestiges of old injustice. Applause roared across the courtyard as the crowd surged forward, entering the center's vaulted atrium bathed in natural light. Inside, murals painted by students lined the walls. Images of phoenixes rising, of microphones balanced on scales, of hands reaching toward open skies. A wall of photographs captured moments of courage. Jalen performing his first song post-reckoning, students pinning notes on the rumor trees, teachers standing up for bullied peers. I ran my hand over the frame of a large photo showing Bradley and Harold at their public apologies, side by side, yet worlds apart. A reminder that accountability can force people to face their worst impulses and sometimes transform them. I led Jalen through the exhibit, watching his eyes track every detail. He paused before a sculpture of a girl holding a paintbrush like a sword, colors splashed across her canvas battlefield. She said art saved her voice. Jalen translated quietly. I squeezed his hand. It saves all our voices. We continued to the performance hall, where rows of chairs awaited the opening showcase. Student musicians, poets, and storytellers prepared backstage, hearts thrumming in unison. As we took our seats, Isla slipped in beside me, her smile radiant in the warm glow of the stage lights. She leaned in, pressing her cheek to mine, and whispered, "We built this from ashes." The word "we" echoed like a vow, a family, once fractured, now united by purpose. The first performer, a soft-spoken sophomore, walked on stage and recited a poem about reclaiming identity after betrayal. Her words wove through the hall like threads of light, and I watched as parents wiped tears and students nodded in solemn recognition. When she finished, I felt a charge of emotion so powerful it nearly stopped my breath. Jalen turned to me, eyes shining. "This is why you did it, Dad." I swallowed back pride and regret alike, remembering the long nights of strategy and the darker moments of doubt. "This is why we all did it," I said. The night unfolded as a tapestry of triumph, a jazz trio honoring resilience, a painting workshop for adults still healing, and a closing piece. A collaboration between former critics and advocates, symbolizing that even those who had erred could become allies in restoration. As the final notes faded, I stood and joined the standing ovation, my gaze sweeping the audience, students, families, even Bradley and Harold, seated quietly in the back row, their expressions inscrutable but present. Afterward, as most guests departed under a starlit sky, I walked the empty halls with Jalen, our footsteps echoing on polished floors. He paused before the Rumor Tree display, a new installation where fabric strips bore handwritten commitments to speak up and act kindly. He added his own slip. I promised to protect others. I read it and placed my arm around his shoulders. And I promised to keep listening. In that moment, I understood that true legacy wasn't about commands or power. It was about creating spaces where voices could rise unafraid. The center we opened was more than brick and glass. It was the culmination of a journey from a single slab to a community fortified by integrity. And as father and son stood together in that quiet building, we knew our work would never truly end, but neither would our hope.